Hello, James. How are you?
Not too bad, Andrew. How are you?
Good, thanks. I started that program with In Questo Mondo di Ladri by Antonello Venditti. I did jokingly say on Twitter yesterday that Venditti had recorded the anthems for two football clubs in Italy. Obviously, Roma, Roma, Roma for the club that he's a supporter of, and In Questo Mondo di Ladri. For those of you who don't speak Italian, it means in this world of thieves. And I think after Saturday night, it's a fitting title to give to the review of this week's match. I mean, this is by far the hardest episode we've had to do to date. I mean, let's be honest, Calciopoli still exists. However, the most important thing is whoever loves Inter loves them regardless of the result. How do you feel about it, James?
Yeah, it's a tough one to do, Andrew, but as they say, the show must go on, and I'm sure the listeners are eager to hear what we have to say about it. I'll speak for both of us when I say that we're delighted to have another person on the show this week. So a big welcome to the Inter show to Anthony. Hello, Anthony. How are you?
Hey, good. Thanks, guys. Thanks a lot for having me. Pleasure.
Perfect. Okay, so going to the theme tunes now. Well, we lost 3-2 to our biggest rivals, but it doesn't really feel like a defeat. It feels more like a theft. What's your take on it, James?
Yeah, it was an emotional roller coaster of a game. It's just a shame that it ended on a downward spiral. We watched the game together, Andrew, and it just seemed that nearly every decision went in Juve's favour. I know you might not agree, but I didn't feel it was a red card for Vecino. He caught him with his studs, but for me, he didn't raise them. His foot was parallel to the ground. He was late into the tackle, and Mandzukic got to the ball first. It was a split second, and his momentum took his foot down onto Mandzukic's shin. I didn't think there was any stamping motion. For me, it was harsh. I mean, the tackle just before half time of Barzagli on Icardi was much worse, I thought. He went sliding in with his studs up and caught him on the leg, but this time it stayed a yellow and there was no VAR review. The disallowed goal for Juve was the only decision I felt went for us, and I was actually surprised it went away. I mean, I thought we battled well with 10 men against 12 effectively, but I feel like they were never going to let us win this game. What's your take on the game, Anthony?
Well, look, just to echo your thoughts, there's nothing new here, but to lose it in that manner was a horrible feeling, a terrible feeling. And I feel like it was all in the back of our heads when we were up 2-1. I know it was definitely in the back of my head that this was far from over because, as you said, we're usually playing against more than just the starting 11 when we're against Juve. Anybody in the Serie A is playing against more than 11 when they're playing against Juve. And I've seen many matches where Juve have been given the advantage via officiating, and this was head and shoulders the worst of the lot, especially against us. So much so that it's even seen intervention from other Inter personnel, and not just other Inter personnel from other clubs. Obviously, we've seen the media get involved. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I don't see the media get this involved in officiating decisions in Serie A matches. I know it's a very high-profile fixture, and the clubs have that kind of history together, but you can just tell there's something different in the air this time. I feel like we played absolutely brilliant, to be honest. Our hearts were beating and bleeding out of our chests, especially when we went down to 10 men. The red card, I'm iffy on it. Had it been given a straight red, I wouldn't really look the other way on it. I've seen reds given for that before in other leagues. But from what I've heard and what I've read, the decision to go back to the VAR and to change the decision and to upgrade it to a red card, it just smells fishy. It just smells Juve. It's as simple as that. So overall, really, the team should be getting back into the swing of things almost immediately to shrug this off. And had this result occurred in the reverse fixture earlier on in the calendar season, and there wasn't so much riding on this one fixture, then I feel like we could really take a lot of positives out of this match and just shrug this off as just another Juve conspiracy fixture. But, I mean, we all saw how Icardi was broken after the match and the reaction from fans and social media. I echo the thoughts. This is a really hard one to take.
Yeah, I just think the Allegri bit with Tagliavento absolutely stank to high heaven. For me, I always sort of judge. I remember Roy Keane saying on ITV, I think it was, as when he was working as a pundit, that he judged whether a red card was fair to him based on whether or not he'd done something to put the referee into a position where he could send him off. And I think that, for me, describes what Vecino did. I don't have an issue with Vecino having been sent off. What I do have an issue with was I genuinely think that Pjanic should have gone. If Vecino's was a red card, so was Pjanic's. But then Pjanic is a Juventino, and we all know the baggage that carries. I mean, a hero of mine, Brian Clough, who I personally consider the greatest manager of all time, I think had it spot on when he referred to Juventus as cheating beasts. Don't like to swear on this show, so we'll keep it with describing it as that. But more specifically, he said, "No cheating bees do I talk to. I will not talk to any cheating bees." However, looking at the positives, the team fought back well, and I'm enthused by their development under Spalletti. Brozovic, Icardi, Perisic, Skriniar, Miranda all played really well. What do you think, Anthony?
Yeah, I agree. In regards to the Talia Allegri incident, I'd be lying if I said it didn't make my stomach turn. Just seeing the smug look on Massimiliano's face, it made me sick seeing that, to be honest. I've never really rated him highly as an elite manager. I strongly feel as though he's been coasting on the success of Conte ever since he took over, and that drop of quality in the midfield is really where you see it. So I'm very much looking forward to seeing the back of his head and even a further decline in Juventus. But the incident itself, it was just something where you look at and you just shake your head and go, this is what it's come to, point blank, blatant in everybody's face. Look, as I said before, the players were brilliant. Brozovic and Icardi are Interistas. You can tell Brozovic really has a passionate disliking for Juve. And I remember it clearly in his reactions to scoring the equaliser to make it 3-0 in the Coppa Italia a couple of seasons back when we were down 3-0 to get us back to 3-3 on aggregate, which we went on to lose on penalties. But he's really seen a resurgence to form at the turn of the year. And I really hope Inter can hang on to him, because he is a great asset in the middle of the park, especially when he's really driving forward and has someone to complement him as well. Skriniar, again, was a beast and a wall. I think he does everything fantastic. He holds his own very well, and he elevates the rest of the defensive line around him. I'll touch on this a bit later on, but I am really worried if Inter was to lose him sometime in the near distant future. Perisic, once again, continued some recent good form, but I have to say, Rafinha, we really need to do everything we can to redeem his loan and turn it into a permanent transfer, because if the release clause really is only 35 million, or if that is what Barcelona is demanding, that is absolute peanuts in today's market, in my opinion. Yes, we are not a powerhouse club like PSG, Manchester United, Madrid financial-wise, but 35 million in today's market for somebody who elevates your midfield and makes static midfielders elevate their game as well, the way Rafinha does. I think it's a no-brainer. And if we don't scrap him up for 35 because we have that relationship built with Barcelona already, I guarantee you another club's going to come and have absolutely no problem putting 40 or 45 million on the table. And that'll be the last we see of Rafinha and someone of his quality in our midfield. I think we absolutely need to redeem him, as it's a steal and a bargain.
Well, James, what was your take on it?
Yeah, despite the setbacks, I thought Inter performed well. There was a few players who were fighting with everything in this game. They realised the importance of the game, not only in the context of what it meant for this season, but also its historical importance with it being a derby d'Italia and what that means for the fans. I feel like it's mostly the same players every week that I'm singling out for their performance, like Rafinha, Brozovic, Icardi and Skriniar. They'll be consistently playing well. But there's desire and commitment that some of the other players I think are lacking. That's evidence to me that why they are the consistent performers. I also felt Miranda and Candreva played well in this game. There was a few poor performances. I didn't think Perisic was that great this week compared to other weeks. And D'Ambrosio didn't play that very well, I thought. Obviously, Vecino got sent off, which his performance wouldn't have been great because of that. Some of them just didn't look motivated, which I thought was disappointing considering the context of the game and what was on the line. And I know it's easy to blame a goalkeeper when you can see goals, but for the first and third goal, I thought Handanovic was shocking. He never moved or attempted to stop it. I understand that the ball's travelling at speed on both occasions, but he managed to turn his head and look at the ball going past him, so I can't understand why couldn't have moved his hand as quick, or even at least tried. Their third goal, he nearly moved his head out of the way to look at it. It was very frustrating to watch. I mean, he did make one good save, but at this level, it was a save you'd expect from a top keeper at a big club to make. So I don't think that saved him from being my worst performer of the day.
No, my biggest problem was Handanovic. I mean, he's a fantastic shot stopper, but I mean, I always make a distinction between a shot stopper and a goalkeeper. To me, a goalkeeper is someone who commands his area. Anything that moves in that 18-yard area is his. Handanovic invariably stays on his line, and the lethargic way he keeps goal at times really lets him down. In my opinion, we won't significantly improve until we have a really commanding number one. Other than that, as I said, the Vecino sending off, for me, I didn't have much of an issue with that. What I did have an issue with was the sort of pally-friendly way that Allegri spoke to Tagliavento. Even if Allegri is completely lacking in the class that's required to carry himself properly there, I think Tagliavento could have said to him, "No, sorry, you don't call me by a nickname." You know, and emphasize that it should be a professional relationship rather than something. It just stinks when you see a manager and a referee. When you see a manager and a referee relating like that. And to be honest, in leagues where there's less of a mark of corruption, for example, the Premier League, I just can't see it being tolerated. To be honest, I think the referee and Handanovic are primarily responsible for the defeats. What's your take on that, Anthony?
See, as for Handanovic, I don't like to say too many bad things about Handanovic, because the amount of points that he has saved us in the last few seasons are up there with the amount of points David De Gea has saved for Manchester United in the last few years, which is plenty. So I'm forever grateful for Handanovic for choosing to spend his best years with us, because I think he really easily could have walked into another big team in Europe and any starting 11 in Italy. I actually think he's been the best keeper in the league in his time at Inter, when you really compare how much pressure he's had to face and some of the really poor teams that have been put in front of him. That being said, his position on all the goals were off. He didn't seem to react well at all. And like James said, the third goal, I knew it was coming, but when I saw his head move out of the way, it almost like the script was written. So while I think Samir Handanovic is the absolute least of our problems, I think he was the worst performer on the pitch, apart from obviously Vecino, who I just have to say, in that moment there, even if the decision is hard, he has shown to have a low footballing IQ, in my opinion, in that decision. This is the Derby d'Italia. This is not a regular match. This is not a mid-table match. You're not at Fiorentina. You need to know the magnitude of this match. And if that means brushing up on your history of the club, the history of the two clubs, and seeing that, maybe we're going into this match as the underdogs because we are playing against an extra man out there in the referee, you need to do everything in your power to make those challenges acceptable. So he's done that right in front of the referee there, and he needs to know not to do that, in my opinion. So this might sound harsh, but if I was Spalletti, my trust issues with Vecino would be almost irreparable.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you on that. Now we'll look at the newspapers. I think, James, you're going to lead this segment this week.
Gazzetta dello Sport led with Juve infinite, Inter angered. At San Siro, emotions, controversies, and a thrilling end 2-3.
Anthony, if you want to read Corriere.
Corriere said Juventus 6, crossed it out 7. So Juventus ci sei, no sette. Basically saying that Juventus is on its way to a 7th Scudetto. It also goes on to say Napoli undone by the 4th man as well. It also goes on to mention Allegri and Inter's fury with Ossato, and also Brozovic's nice little touch on social media. This is what I mentioned before about him being a hardcore Interista. If he's going to put something like that for his whole fan base and the rest of the world to see, that goes well with me. He's not blind, and he's not letting, if these issues ended up as far-fetched as they were, he's completely fine with publicising that as well. So, forza Brozo.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that. And Tuttosport, a crazy Juve. Obviously, we're never going to get impartial reporting from them. We haven't been able to get copies of the Milanese and Turinese versions of Metro this week, but we do have some questions. Interista _RU asked, should we keep Spalletti for the next season? Would we get better results if we had another coach? I mean, in my opinion, we absolutely have to keep Spalletti. We have to remember where we've come from. Last season we finished 7th. Yes, we've had long periods of not playing well this season, but I think the most important thing for me is the defence is so strong, notwithstanding last Saturday's match. And I think you build from the back. I also don't think it's a great idea to chop and change managers all the time. It breeds sort of no consistency within the club. James, what would be your reading on that?
Yeah, I think we definitely have to keep Spalletti for next season. I mean, for half of the season, we were top of the league and playing the best football in Serie A. And like I said to you last week on the show, like, we do have to keep consistent with a manager. We've had, I think, 9 managers in 9 years or maybe more. Like, success does not come from chopping and changing managers that frequently. I mean, maybe if you're Real Madrid and you can throw hundreds and hundreds of millions at it, you might get success doing it. But for the vast majority of clubs, you have to stick with a manager for at least 3 seasons, in my mind, to get some consistency, especially where we're coming from. And look, we're trying to get back to the Champions League, so it's not going to happen if we chop and change managers. What do you think of it, Anthony?
Oh, this is a no-brainer. We have to keep Spalletti. He's the best thing that has been at our club since Mourinho, managerial-wise. This managerial merry-go-round has to end, and it has to end at Spalletti staying for another season, maybe even more if we can achieve our objectives if we have to reset them. But you only have to look at our style of play this season to know that it is just a lot more fluid when it works, when the defense has always been fine, but when the right players have been selected and then we've come up against sides, we have played in a way that we have not played in a long time, a dominant way in a long time. You just look at some of the results and the goals that we've scored, being 3-0 up against Sampdoria earlier on, only to concede late. That was disappointing, but we smashed Chievo. We absolutely smashed Cagliari as well. So Hellas by 3, Sampdoria away by 5 as well. So we've had really, really good matches this season in which our form has been fantastic. So I can't fault Spalletti on that, and let's just hope that the board has the same vision.
Yeah, it's for those of you who are interested, if you go on to Twitter and search for the hashtag Ask the Inter Show. Interista RU's actually put up quite an amusing picture of the evolution of football supporters in Italy. It should cheer you up anyway. Another question from Hisham: where do we go from here, guys? How would we possibly be able to cope with the financial burdens after yet another season without Champions League football? Unfortunately, this does seem like a never-ending loop. I'm going to say something I think is probably controversial here. I don't think it's the end of the world if we don't get Champions League football. In some ways, I actually think it's an advantage because Sonning has put it as their sort of acceptable performance. They want to get into the Champions League, but I don't think the squad is strong enough for the Champions League at the moment. Obviously, like every other Interista, I'd love to see us back in the Champions League, but something's got to happen to jolt Sonning into realising that this squad just isn't up to it. And I think if we were to get into the Champions League, it could mask a lot of the problems that are inherent in this squad. And what do you think, Anthony?
Yeah, no, those are some really good points. I think we really put it on a pedestal at the start of the season that making the Champions League was the be all and end all. And why not? We've added a lot more quality. We have a manager who's more than capable of taking sides to the Champions League. Of course, they finished runners up last season. He's left a side that he has qualified the Champions League with to come to our side. No European football as a distraction. So it really was the be-all and end-all. And I think that's been a bit of a problem with our mental fragility this season, is the fact that there's always that on a pedestal of making the Champions League. And if we don't reach it, well, it's going to be a disaster. And we've already seen that our club over the last few years since Mourinho has left, we aren't exactly the strongest mental side in the world. We collapse at the first opportunity on the pitch, and off the pitch, we don't exactly handle ourselves very well at the moment. So for me, the biggest challenge is the club's mentality at the end of this season, where they choose to go from here. Do they choose to see this season as a positive? Because I definitely still do. Not making the Champions League will be devastating, and to miss out in the way that we have, it hasn't been good. But we need to blame our whole season for that, to be honest.
And James, what's your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, financially, I don't think it's the end of the world. I mean, like, Sunning have enough money that if they want to spend it, the money they're missing out on from the Champions League isn't going to affect them. Like, obviously, we do want to be in the Champions League, and as fans, like, the big European nights are what it's all about. It's just, for me, missing out on the Champions League is more about the level of player you attract. I mean, if Sunning are willing to spend the money and go out for a top player, there's very few of them are willing to go to teams that aren't in the Champions League. And for me, that's the biggest loss of not getting Champions League, and maybe even holding on to Icardi. Like, he seems like he seemed very upset at the game the other day, and I'm thinking that he might have just known he's played his last Derby d'Italia. So I think Champions League is more about the level of player rather than the financial. Also, there was a third question coming in on Ask the Inter Show, which was from myself, but it was directed for you, Andrew. Is Handanovic better than Neville Southall?
I think this is something of a sore point for me. As listeners will know, I'm a Welshman and I have a particular bias towards Neville Southall. Neville Southall was the goalkeeper I grew up watching, and I don't think anybody, certainly in my opinion, anybody will ever come close to him. So I'm not going to attack. I'm not going to attack Samir for not being to the same level as Big Nev. Looking at the next match, for me, the biggest challenge is picking ourselves up after that result. We need to, because I'm convinced Atalanta can get a result against Lazio, and then we're back in the race for the Champions League. We need to look to our leaders to raise the spirits, and even if we miss out, we need to go down fighting. I also refuse to blame Spalletti for where we are. As I said earlier, he's taken us forward so much this season. I think we have to proceed with him, especially because constant changing doesn't help the club to progress. James, your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, with only 3 games to go, we have to win them all to make the Champions League, and even at that, it's still not guaranteed we make it if we win them all. So obviously, this game is vital. But we're coming up against the Udinese team that are in dreadful form. They've only had 1 draw out of their last 5 games and lost the other 4. And they're only sitting 3 points above the relegation zone, albeit with 3 teams between them and it. So they're probably going to survive the drop, but it won't make it any easier. They'll be fighting for their lives. And with the emotional baggage from Saturday to deal with, I think we're in for another nervy game. I think Inter have to keep Spalletti, as we were mentioning earlier, because for me, I think his tactics have been working. He has to stick with the formation. I think it's just some individuals have been letting him down, not so much his tactical decisions. That's why I feel the squad might need to be overhauled in the summer, especially if we don't make the Champions League. Some of these players aren't up to the required standard, I don't think, to get into the Champions League, let alone play in it. I think we might eke out a narrow win to keep the Champions League a possibility, but ultimately I see us failing in this objective this season. What's your opinion on the game and the rest of the season, Anthony?
Yeah, I think I agree. I echo your thoughts when I say there's absolutely nothing wrong tactically. As I mentioned earlier, we've put in enough performances this season to suggest that we are more than up to the task. It's just the mentality of some of the players need to be questioned and whether or not they're up to rising above. Because for me, the biggest challenge now lies at the end of the season with certain players. Do they see themselves here to continue the fight? Are they a part of the project? Do they believe in the project? Is there a project? What does it mean for us financially? Are we able? This is why I think it's really important. is not reaching this objective going to affect the redemption offers for Cancelo and Rafinha? Because I personally think Cancelo is the best fullback we've had since Douglas Maicon. I think he's fantastic going forward. He's got a very, very confident touch about him. His link-up play with players in the center of the park like Rafinha and Brozovic is fantastic, not to mention when Caramon starts on the right in front of him as well. It really is a free, fluid, exciting style of Inter that I haven't seen in such a long time. So I think the foundations are really, really set. And it's disappointing that we need to sit here so insecure, questioning the mentality of some of the people in the club. But I think that's going to be the biggest challenge. Hopefully, at the end of the season, our stars, Icardi, Skriniar, they really do believe in the process and the project, and they choose to stay. Because ultimately, if the club is looking to finance and overhaul, these are going to be our two main men. Icardi will have an offer of north of 100 million. Skriniar will have an offer of north of 50 million. It really only took about 5 or 6 matches this season for Skriniar in our jersey to be recognized and linked with the likes of Barcelona and clubs in England as well. But to be honest, ultimately, I agree with James. I think we're going to miss out on the objective at the end of the season. But I just want to make my feelings clear. We didn't miss out on this objective against Juventus. To me, we missed out on this objective. We missed out when we decided to switch off last minute against Spal, against Fiorentina, against Crotone. The 3-1 loss to Udinese was a really hard one to take at home, especially since our momentum was good. And that's what really derailed us from there. So I think if we do miss out at the end of the season, it'll be a collective process of just ourselves to blame.
Yeah, this week's special history section. Oh, sorry, Andrew.
No, you go ahead.
This week's special history section is of a personal nature. Anthony, could you tell us why you became an Interista?
Sure. Don't tell too many stories, but this one I can't get enough of. So my father grew up in a smallish Western Sydney suburb called Fairfield. A couple of times a week during his early teen years in the 70s, I think it was, yeah. In the 70s, he would go and play indoor cricket. Each time he would go and pick up another young Italian boy down the street who wanted to play as well. This young Italian boy was about 10 or 11 years old. However, at age 12, this young Italian boy realized that cricket wasn't for him. And before my father knew it, Christian Bobovieri left Fairfield behind to pursue his real career. So Forza Inter, Forza Vieri, and Forza Fairfield in Western Sydney.
What a story, brilliant story. We also like to bring you news of Inter's teams which attract less attention in the press. In Shenzhen in China, the Evergrande Under-17 tournament is being played, and our Allievi squad went down fighting against Kashima Antlers of Japan. Oristano and Goffi both scored braces for Gabriele Bonaccini's side in a 5-4 defeat, which leaves them in the playoff for 7th place. One other news item I think we should just quickly discuss before leaving. Sevilla are chasing Piero Ausilio for their next sporting director. What do you think of this news, Anthony?
To be honest, that's the first I'm hearing of it now. But if it's true, I think Ausilio has done a pretty good job at our role. I remember hearing this a few days ago, but I actually didn't think there was anything concrete to it. So if you're telling me this now, then it's actually the first I'm really hearing of it properly from another Inter fan. So I believe that Vincenzo Montella has been relieved of his duties the last couple of days. And initially I read that if Ausilio was going to link up in there, it was because he was going to link up with Montella. So I've just assumed with Montella being relieved of his duties that the rumours, if they are rumours, they will start to fall, or if there's any substance to it, maybe that will go away.
I mean, I'd be of the opposite opinion. I'm thinking of signings like Gabriele Barbosa, Joe Mario, that Ausilio was fundamental in. In my opinion, he's been a big part of our failure in recent years, with some signings which have never worked out. Personally, I'd let him go and go all out to try and get Pier Paolo Marino, an excellent sporting director who currently isn't working in that role. What do you think, James?
Yeah, I mean, he's had a few poor signings, but I'd have to agree with Anthony. I think for the most part, he's got our signings better. He's got better signings than he's got worse signings. I mean, if you're batting 50% with signings in modern football, I think you're doing a good job. So, but I can't see if we did get a change that it wouldn't be for the better. So I suppose if he does leave, we'll just have to focus on the club and who we get in, and hopefully then we can get somebody in to replace him that will do a better job, regardless of how good a job we think he did. Because at the end of the day, it's about making progress. So if someone comes in and does a better job, then it's better for the club. So,
well, that's all for this week. Thank you for listening to the podcast. If you like it, please subscribe and feel free to send any questions to us on Twitter using #AskTheInterShow.
Thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed this week's episode. Huge thanks to Anthony for being on the show. Anthony, you're welcome to join us anytime. It was a pleasure having you.
Thanks, guys, for having me. It was a pleasure, and thank you to everybody who listened. Good stuff. Forza Inter.
Just before we finish, Jerry sent in a question asking us to translate into chants. So for those of you who are interested, stay listening after the closing theme, where we'll be adding this additional feature for the next few episodes. Until next week, Forza Inter. I'm going to open this segment of the show as requested by Jerry with the chant that we opened the show with, Chi noi siamo, who we are, which is really the anthem of Curva Nord. Okay, so the chant starts by the Capi Ultra, the Ultra leaders shouting "Everywhere we go," which the Curva then repeats. The same, people want to know. People then in the Curva repeat, people want to know who we are. So we tell them who we are, and then the whole of the Curva, together with the Capi Ultra, sings, "We are the Black and Blue Army, and nobody will ever stop us. We will always be there when Inter play, because Inter is the team of the Ultras. Black and blue are the colours we love. Black and blue, you are everything for us. At the San Siro, in Italy, in Europe, you're the team of us, you're Ultras." I hope you enjoyed that, Jerry, and we'll translate another one for you next week. Anyone who's any questions, please send them to #AskTheInterShow, and until next week, Forza Inter.
The podcast you just heard was recorded with Anchor. If you want to make your own, download the Android or iOS app completely free from anchor.fm/podcast. That's anchor.fm/podcast.